A very good morning to you. Thank you very much for watching KBC Channel 1. You are in time for BizCheck. My name is Betty Kiptum, and Susan Thuku is my colleague on the sign language interpretation. Now, we want to talk about matters connectivity in rural areas, and the body that is mandated to ensure that there is connectivity across the country is the Communications Authority of Kenya. And to have this conversation is Christopher Kemei, who is the director of the Universal Service Fund. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Karibu sana. Could you just tell us the role of Communications Authority and where the Universal Service Fund falls?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think most of us are aware, of course, that Communications Authority of Kenya is the regulator for the ICT sector. Part of its responsibilities as provided for in law is to ensure that there are communication services provided across the country, in the sense that every Kenyan is able to communicate for a variety of reasons. So from a regulatory perspective, of course, we do that through, licensing and regulating players in the field.
Right. So USF, where does USF fall in all this?
Yes, so that's a good question. Now, with all the efforts that are being put in place in terms of regulating the industry for purposes of expanding communication services throughout the country, and considering the mechanisms that are being used, which is basically the rollout obligations for services and networks, what is appreciated is that those efforts are often insufficient, in the sense that we are dealing with businesses. We are dealing with operators that are running on the basis of profitability. But in certain circumstances, there are some areas that do not make business sense to some of these operators. And there is only an extent to which you can go in terms of pushing them to those particular areas to provide connectivity. But the challenge usually is the return on investment on their part. They do contribute, yes, there are areas that they are running networks and providing services without getting any profit. In fact, maybe sometimes they subsidize these, but that is not sufficient to ensure that there is coverage throughout the country. And that is the space for the Universal Service Fund. And the fund is basically just to incentivize them further by providing them some subsidies that then will bridge the gap between the cost of providing services and the return on investment arising from the operations in those particular areas. Yeah.
And for context purposes, there's a report by the Communications Authority that indicated that in 2021, I don't know if the numbers have changed, about 1.7 million Kenyans were not covered by mobile or internet services. And of course, that means there is quite a need to reach these people, because at the end of the day, they are still Kenyans.
Absolutely,
right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you ensure that you are getting to these people? And even before you get there, has this number changed?
The number is pretty much the same. Our estimate as per 2021 is that about 3.6% of Kenyans have no access to mobile communication services. It's even much worse for other services like broadcasting, for example, or postal courier. So with respect to mobile communication services, it's true that there are still about 1.7 Kenyans that are left behind. I must add, of course, that in addition to that, we are talking about 40% of the geographical coverage of the country is still not covered by mobile communication services. So there is the element of coverage in terms of population, but there is also the element of coverage in terms of geographical area. What does that mean? It means that 40% of the country, if you travel, you will miss communication networks. But you see the efforts that are being done then are being guided by where people live. So the priority being given is to target the people. And following through that is, of course, to ensure that the entire landmass is covered, in considering that people sometimes move. And when they move, they should be able to get services in those areas. So we are far ahead in terms of covering people, depending on where they live, but we still have a long way to go in terms of ensuring that the country, from a geographical perspective, is covered.
When you say 40%, that is a big chunk of the country.
It is, yes.
So that means the fact that these parts are not covered, it even slows down their development in terms of business-wise, because if I'm looking to go set up shop somewhere, I'll definitely go somewhere that there is connectivity, right?
Yeah.
So there are disadvantages to not being connected, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. There are disadvantages. The reason why we are talking about 40%, if you look at the way the demographics of this country, you know, a large number of the population are in the southern part of the country, which is probably less than 20% of the country. That may be taking about 90% of the population. The northern part of the country is extremely sparsely populated. And that is then what informs the gaps in terms of geographical coverage. So as I said, to cover areas, if you take you know, some areas in the northern part and northeastern part of the country, you will find that very few people live there in some areas, or the people live in pockets, in villages and so on. And those are the areas that have been targeted, where they live. But you notice that there are also national parks that you know, cover a lot of areas that are reserve you know, areas, and you know, different types of land usage that the level of utilization of communication services is low. So those are the ones that, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be provided communication services, but it's not, we have not gotten to that point yet. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it would require quite some investment to do that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. An enormous amount of investments is required to ensure that the coverage is 100%. Is
provided. Yeah. Seeing that maybe it does not make sense to the private sector to put in that much investment because the returns are not as much. Yeah. What can the government, and CA to be specific, as the body that is mandated with ensuring that every Kenyan is connected, what can you do as an authority?
So it's not so much about what we can do, it's about what we are doing. Right. So what we are doing, upon the establishment of the Universal Service Fund in 2009, and we've been, you know, basically collecting money into the fund. We started a bit late because there were teething problems initially for about 5 years. But from around 2015, 2016, we then embarked on the process of rolling out infrastructure in these particular areas that I spoke about, which is, you know, again, rolling out through the operators in the market. So what we've been doing is to do what we call a reverse bidding. What do we mean by that? We ask the operators that there is this particular area, or you know, geographical area that needs to be provided with communication services. Tell us the least amount of, you know, funds that you require to be able to cover those areas based on the parameters that we give. And the parameters that we give is minimum 80% of population coverage and a minimum of 60% of geographical coverage. Okay. So the one that, among the players, the one that offers the lowest amount of, you know, offer in terms of subsidy that they require is then given an opportunity to roll out this infrastructure and be, you know, upon completion, then, you know, given these subsidies. So we've been running that particular program. We started with phase 1. Currently we are in phase 3, and we are just about to start phase 4. Through that process, we've been able to provide coverage in over 200 sublocations, which sublocations have been prioritized based on the level of coverage, meaning those that are at coverage of less than 50% of the population. Others are as low as 0, as in there's no coverage completely. So what we did in terms of prioritization is to take those that are 50% and below as our priority sublocations. So that then has taken us to a situation where we've reduced the coverage in terms of population by way of, putting or bringing on board about 700,000, Kenyans, into the coverage bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is for mobile services?
That is for mobile services, yes.
Mm-hmm. And do you have, are there charging ports? How will these people?
Yes, so initially we had not factored that. Through it's been a learning process for us. Initially in phase 1, we had not thought about that. But when we realized that it would be necessary also to provide accompanying facilities, like, for example, charging points, as you said, we have then redesigned phase 2 and phase 3 to ensure that in strategic places, markets, there are provided charging points for people, especially in areas where there is no grid. Mm-hmm. So that is already part of the program that we are running. At the same time, we are also encouraging other providers to establish, because the infrastructure that we are covering currently in those areas is quite advanced. It's actually 4G, meaning that internet connectivity is well established. So we are thinking then, we can leverage on that opportunity by creating other opportunities like online jobs, digital innovations, and such like opportunities for then making connectivity a lot more useful beyond just the calling and sending SMS and browsing the internet. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, you mentioned the digital jobs, and President Ruto's government is very keen to ensure that we are tapping as much as we can. Yeah. And CS sits right at the middle of ensuring that this is a success, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Mm. Yeah, so with that, we are in partnership with the ICT Authority, ICTA in short. Currently, we have a partnership where we intend to roll out, actually not intend, but in the process of rolling out 2,500 kilometers of fiber at a cost of 5 billion shillings. And since the funding for that infrastructure is coming from the Universal Service Fund, and of course considering that the fund is geared to provision of services in unserved areas, unserved and underserved areas, we have then selected about 19 counties, actually 19 to be specific, 19 counties that are at the bottom of the connectivity hierarchy. As priority, counties for provision of optical fiber, which is really high broadband connectivity. Mm. And the intention, of course, is not necessarily to target the ordinary persons, but mainly the institutions, either government institutions, schools, hospitals, and the likes, so that then they are able to be part of the wider broadband connectivity. And also the mobile operators and other service providers will be leveraging on that infrastructure in order to provide the backhaul facilities for traffic that is then going to be created from those particular areas. So we are doing that. We are again in discussion with other agencies like ICTA, KONZA, and others for purposes of establishing what we call centers of excellence, where people can get online jobs. They can do online jobs from there. They can have their innovations, be they in terms of digital innovations, they can run from those particular centers of excellence. And of course, generally having, opportunities to be really part of the global internet and everything that goes with that. We specifically intend to, in this coming financial year, we specifically intend to roll out a coding program, which is a program intended to provide knowledge of programming. And this will be part of the portfolio of services that will be provided through those centers of excellence that we are establishing in partnership with other agencies of government.
Those are definitely skills that are in high demand currently in the market.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, speaking of education, of course, there are some things that you have done as USF to empower people in the education sector, deliver the services better. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes, connectivity for the education sector is definitely a priority. It has been our priority. We started off with a project in 2016 as a pilot for connecting, providing broadband connectivity to schools. And we started with schools that we considered were E-ready. The list of those schools was provided to us by the Ministry of Education. And the criteria for selection was you must have a computer lab, you must have an ICT teacher, you must be providing ICT as an examinable subject. So arising from that selection process, we did run a program for connecting about 886 schools to the broadband. Primarily secondary schools at that particular time. So we did successfully connected all of them. And we are still in discussion with the Ministry of Education to see how we can synergize that program going forward so that we can ensure that as many schools, if not all schools, can be connected. But of course, the cost is enormous. We may not be able to just rely on the fund alone. We must, we have to look for other ways of doing that, perhaps through partnership with other initiatives. For example, there is an initiative by the International Telecoms Union and UNICEF, if I'm not mistaken, called GIGA. That particular initiative intends to, it's a global initiative, and its objective is to connect every school across the world. So we have been in discussion with the GIGA-led team here in Kenya and outside to see to it that we can leverage on that opportunity in order to foster connectivity to schools. Right.
You'll tell us just the impact. Okay, could you tell us maybe the impact of the connection of the 886 schools? What has been witnessed?
The impact, based on an assessment that again was done externally by our partners, the International Telecoms Union, in partnership with the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. The impact has been significant. Although, of course, we must hasten to say that there remain a bit of a few challenges. Just to give you an example, some of the challenges that were identified was the the posting of teachers and subsequently transfer. So again, you'd find an ICT teacher may be transferred and replaced by one who is perhaps not well capacitated in terms of helping the school. But by and large, just in summary, it was a successful program. I must hasten to say, of course, we face a sustainability challenge with respect to that program. Because the nature of USF is to get in and get out. In other words, to support in the deployment of infrastructure, but not to sustain it. Okay. Because sustaining really should be done by the beneficiaries. So we help in terms of initiating and doing, like, for example, if I take the example of mobile networks, so we help to incentivize the operators to be there. Once they are there, they will sustain the program
All right.
themselves.
Allow me to just cut you short
Sure.
a little bit. We come back to studio and continue with our conversation with Christopher Kemei, the director of Universal Service Fund and the Communications Authority of Kenya, and we are talking about connecting rural Kenya. Mr. Kemei, before we went on those links, you were telling us about the sustainability of the education projects. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was indicating that the setup of the Universal Service Fund is to really take on the initial investments in terms of infrastructure rollout. And then once we have done that, we then leave it to the relevant beneficiary to sustain it. That's what we've been doing. With respect to the education sector, we went beyond that and sustained that particular project for about 5 years. But we got ourselves into a point that we were running out of funds to sustain it. So we asked the Minister of Education to look into how they will continue sustaining that particular project. So in general, sustainability is a question that remains a huge challenge for all of us. Even as we talk about, rolling out this infrastructure in rural areas, we have to think about how do we sustain them. And when it comes to ICT, it's even more challenging because the rate at which equipment becomes obsolete is very, very, very rapid. I mean, we are talking about 3 years max. You must change the entire infrastructure and replace with new infrastructure. Yeah.
Apart from education, there's the issue of agriculture. Of course, reaching farmers in the unserved and underserved areas is very important for them to access even information that helps them to improve their yields and stay up to date with the latest trends.
Yeah.
What is the authority doing on that front?
Yeah, so we have a partnership currently running with the KALRO. KALRO is the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research Organization. It's the body that runs, the research and advisory services to the agricultural and livestock industry. So we are running a project of digitizing, content, agricultural advisory content. What we realized, Betty, is that in this country, there is a lot of research that has been done. In this case, we are talking about the research relating to agriculture and livestock practices. Unfortunately, this information has been sitting, somewhere, and people have not been able to access to improve their, practices, skills and practices within the agricultural sector. So we are running that program specifically to facilitate provision of advisory services as on a real-time basis to farmers, weather information, what kind of plans to establish in a specific, and it's localized, so it is targeting specific areas. All the information relating to that particular area is then presented to those people. It's customized for each area. And by the end of this year, I think we will be complete with that program as we discuss other opportunities to expand the provision of those very critical services to the agricultural sector. So yes, we have not left out the farmers. Yeah.
And part of the customization to the different regions, including having it in their local dialect.
Absolutely. So yes, so part of it, of course, is the recognition of the need to use the local languages for better understanding. Yes, we are doing that. So the digital content is being digitized and translated into local languages, and it will be disseminated through text messages, push messages, as well as other means of communication, including radio, local radios, and TV stations as well. And more importantly, KALRO has advisory centers And we are establishing infrastructure in those centers where a farmer, if you're interested in getting more in-depth information, you go to these centers and you access all that information with guidance from the KALRO experts in those centers. Yeah.
When we were growing up, we used to go to libraries to read, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes your parents would send you to the library to ensure that you are actually studying and not just playing.
Yeah.
And over time, of course, the way people consume such information has changed.
Yeah.
What is being done to ensure that there is digitization of the content that is, you know, in books?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Much earlier on, several years back, we noticed that opportunity of bringing the provision of library services, you know, modernizing, you know, by introducing ICT connectivity. So what we did is we partnered with the Kenya National Library Services, KNLS, and we started digitizing content that they have and providing connectivity in all 56 libraries in this country that are run by KNLS. So as we speak, when you go to KNLS library, you don't have to grapple with, you know, paper books. Everything now is in digital. So all the, you know, books that they display or they've been, you know, displaying on their shelves is now on a digital platform. So you go there, and for the young people who are more, you know, inclined to, you know, going through digital, you know, content, then that is the place to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll continue with our conversation on matters connecting rural Kenya with Christopher Kemei, who is the Director in charge of Universal Service Fund at the Communications Authority of Kenya. Christopher, before I let you go, I think it would be unfair not to ask a question about the current migration that the government is implementing, government services being taken online. What is the role of Communications Authority during this process and ensuring that the quality of service is top-notch?
Thank you very much for that question. I think our primary role remains connectivity. When we talk about moving government services to, you know, e-platforms, you cannot then benefit from that, you know, migration if you don't have connectivity. And this is the reason we are putting more emphasis in ensuring that there's connectivity for the general public, so that then they are not left behind. They are able to access government services that are then being, you know, migrated online. So in fact, our job now is even more critical than before, because, you know, now government is moving faster in terms of digitization and enabling e-services or e-government services. Then it behooves on us to move even faster to ensure that nobody's left behind in that space. So we are then redoubling our efforts to ensure that we facilitate that program of digitization of government services.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very important. So as we come to a close of the conversation, what does the future look in terms of the connectivity of this country?
I think the future is bright. With the initiatives that we are currently running with, we see really bright light at the end of the tunnel. And I think with the pace in which technology is evolving, much more opportunities are, you know, likely to present themselves. We just heard the president talking about digital hubs, which we are also in that space. I think the future is bright. We just need to identify the opportunities and quickly latch on those opportunities, especially for the young people. And we will be able to create a true global society.
Awesome. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much.
That is Christopher Kemei, who is the Director of the Universal Service Fund at the Communications Authority of Kenya. And we have been talking about how the authority is connecting rural Kenya, especially the unserved and underserved, a number of programs, including in the education sector, agriculture sector, ensuring that your libraries, the KNLS libraries, are also digitized. and he says that the future is bright and connectivity will reach every Kenyan in the long run. That is the first conversation during BizCheck. We shall be coming with the next conversation in a little bit. That will be about understanding and investing in carbon markets, and that conversation will be with Sarah Njoroge, who has quite some understanding on matters climate change and carbon markets. Let's join you in a little bit after this short break. Do stay with us.